Just there. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this virtual panel discussion with Tibetan youth in Australia. This year, Tibetans all over the world are marking the year of our gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Today's event, which is hosted by the Tibet Information Office based in Canberra, is the third in a series of virtual panel discussions held as part of the Year of Gratitude celebrations. My name is Tenzin Hadar Rinpoche. I am an economist based in Canberra, and I am the moderator for today's discussion. I'm joined today by our panel members, Thering Samkar, who is a final year law and international relations student at the Australian National University in Canberra. Thering La will speak on the theme of human rights and world peace. Doreen Tenzin Phuntsok is the son of a former political prisoner. He holds a Master of Philosophy in Political Science from Madras University. He is a former president of the Tibetan community of Queensland. Tenzin Phuntsok will speak on the political perspective. Pema Dolkar, who is currently working as a content producer at Australian public broadcaster SBS. Pema is an alumni of Sydney University. Pema will speak on the theme of education. And finally, Tsawang Thuptenla, a graduate of the Australian National University who is currently a public servant in the Australian federal government in Canberra. Tong will speak on the theme of the environment. So on behalf of myself and I'm sure all the panelists today, I would like to express our heartfelt thanks to the Tibetan Information Office and to His Holiness's representative in Australia, Kungo Takula, for this wonderful opportunity to be a part of today's event. It is a tremendous pleasure for us to be able to play a part in these celebrations because when it comes to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, there is so much for us to be grateful for and so much for us to celebrate. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our panelists today and the discussion that will follow. Our program today is scheduled to take around an hour to 90 minutes. Following my introductory remarks, I will ask each panelist to speak for 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll then have a discussion session for the remainder of the event. I ask the audience to please send through any questions they have to Tibettv, and we will do our best to answer them during the discussion session. Today's panel discussion will be in English, but given His Holiness the Dalai Lama's tremendous efforts to safeguard Tibetan culture and language, I believe it is only fitting that I commence with a short introduction in Tibetan as well, before handing over to our first panelists. Number Samatastile, Tiringi Joding Na Yamshunage da Sinage Samola Samji Shugir. Tiring Jolin the Australia na Yobe Pepashunge to the Jawar Mushikari Jin Jolin Chadi. Tiring Jolin the Australia na Yobe Peshung Uzak Tenjukangi Kojina Machre, the Anzuki Aranda Tanz Tiring Jolin and Samet Shiche in Tabane Gauchu, any Kuzak Tenjukanda. Kuzak Tenjukwan Havala, Ning Taban, Tojina Shui. Catering Manzuki Jolin de la Chige, Trobuto, Sigin, on the Jolin, there were Inge to Shui. Inaya Inge to Jolin the Gomazukon and Tamian Pegato de Zenis in East. That in Zetambu the Manzutin Jolin the Kundishnugi, Kajin go the Jolin Chadi. Being around the Jolina against the Yamyon da that tonte Shisunchin, that Jolin Sugarua, Inaya Yegi, Seochin Shunin to Ezi de la Yaromuchi Gajini, and Pebayonzo, the Nimanashin Roa, in short Tamjini, Ya Che Yonji Chadi, in the Aranzo Ranjung comes away in a Shindon, the Medo, the Lodo, the Tamje, Nimegi, Churgi Gajin, Ya. And so you Nashin, and so Pepazzo, Rechinina, Kundishnu Gajin Gita, Cabdi Yoji Chadi. In the Gajin Dicheson, Dichonson, Chene Shuna, higher songmindu, and a Chanley gave a Chadi. And Siwa in Anzo, Tandan Siwa in Anzo, Mirig, Loduna la, Lodujum Budding Nala. But Tizu Kasho di Chadi. The Tizu Kasho de got the Kundishnu Gaji, but Tele, Henry na shimbare, na yure. Indi aranzogi pöde siwa ina nima pö ranzema shoyo tisi siwa ina. Kundishino gonglo chunju inba ina yang lekchoyogi yubo khadze natana yoro. Hani zenjoy pesadi wanzo ta zenjoy jigzuk sa sugo chi wanzogi shichaye gondeka ta sadu pewa tsola jig nilin shuyogi tablam sheyun chode rikshung cho tamjini 가족이 딱 나요로 딘데 롱바 요게 망고지 롱바 망고스기 나마트 얘기 딩고 군디슈노 코니치고 오치니 나한테요로 딘데 오늘 템도 마셔야 차대 당한서 레트리 슌게 조리나겐즈 세웨이나 오실레나 요에게 슌게죠 먼저 치게 냠도 셰유 봄바 냠룹 chen 로트에 야보친 공부 쉬어있나 군디슈노 가지 진짜리래 로아 니 아란즈 게르레레 미레 삼타이 가지 인당 젠다메 오칭니 갈롭란데기 투지가지 라신 제와 중젤 사마 까니 소소 게르기 까니 가리 중앙이나 돈렌치에기 탑람 아니 셈기 되기 네투베기 탑람 디나게 군디슈노 갈롭니 차디레 인디 다 디스페이션 같이 차대리네 탈리 개월이 쉬어도죠. 디즈니원이 슈닌 트레이디 먼저기 까지 진서 해버 지구 디그리 성문도 먼저 까지 쳔베 거네 까지 따베디 공부하시고도 네 먼저 파마 섬당이나 먼저 파메까지 주의 요래 완성하더라 알아나 발람나 베란 까지 친구이 파메까지 samnataina phamegari sabe thablam yashodi phamegi ka jube dirwa phamegi ka sungyo zunyen lalen dai di imbaro chini aranzo yawarumbuchi gi kanawa de lalen rupthumna ani kari sabe gi mopotu resang dirwa kondin gi katso mare samji tewaina kundishnu katso dojina papsani shone 오체 쇼그를 상도 지금 수업이 맞차네 니와 대한 지금 미진 맞차네 삼단 쇼그를 상도 다 그바진 맞차네 이게 뭐 말아왔지 안즈 메기 삼된들라 닝了장네 가디나 닝了장에다 아니 안조 나치기 지전에 차외 여러 상부 공시디 안조 셈유라 쯔와체네 아니 미세케 되체 아니 가와데나야 펜토웬과 랩투버지 제디 차도 이래서 좀 설버진 거잖아 아니 먼저 미진버차니나야 군디슈노 잠불린 찔라 여러 상주기 누바 인디케이터리는 세큘러 에틱스 주기로와 이 캡투버 공부시기 위해서 만소 디기토라 슈 is gyawthuwaina ani kadi sabela hendo yongre sangdo tindi tande ngeta this naso ina ni dojine ya de dojine ma shuina condition kalo ani sungjo khaduina manjula suye chense nae di signi doji di ta shenla pento to pento wachi pento ma to ina nema ge sunye chiro ichadi re sangdo 디 ngaran 저기 템규를 짜네 라렌지 탈토에나 아니 문에 컨디션 까지 타벨라 공부포에 투고 그랬었는데 인딩에 벽에도라 이 베이스 주인 줘서 다 벽에도 디랑 인게 다시 쉬어나시 인지 지게 조고스 대화디 먼저 인게 돌아라니 아니 lost touch나 so thanks for bearing with me while I spoke briefly in Tibetan So now I think we can get the panel discussion started if all our panelists are ready. So Tsering-La, I might hand over to you as our first panelist to speak on the theme of human rights and world peace. Tsering-La, over to you.
Thank you. So Nangatong Lotosh Delashu, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this panel discussion celebrating this year of gratitude to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama across various sectors. So I'll be addressing the topic of world peace and human rights. So As we're all aware, as I'm sure the viewers are aware and the panelists are aware, His Holiness is an example of a life dedicated to peace, nonviolence, and unity. So since China's invasion and occupation of Tibet, now over the past over 6 decades, we've seen the repression of our religion, culture, and language, the systematic exploitation and devastation of our ecosystem, and the oppression of our peoples and their assertion of basic human rights, as well as the degradation of traditional nomadic ways of life. But in spite of these injustices and sufferings of his people and his country, His Holiness has remained a consistent voice for peace and offering a middle way approach to the political problem of Chinese occupation of Tibet. So His Holiness's commitment to dialogue, to nonviolence and advocacy for peaceful solutions of the Tibet issue based on tolerance and coexistence has been recognized internationally through accolades, including the Nobel Peace Prize, the US Congressional Gold Medal, as well as honorary citizenships of India, the US, Canada, numerous awards from international institutions, and honorary doctorates from universities around the world. So His Holiness's contribution to creating a global consciousness, a global awareness about Tibet, both in terms of the human rights situation, as well as the political issue and the history of Tibet as a free and independent country, has been enormous, has been profound. And also His Holiness has made a huge contribution by offering both a pragmatic and a peaceful solution for the Tibet issue for the international communities, so for international governments and world leaders. But I'll be focusing, the next couple of minutes, I'll be focusing on how His Holiness has extended his inspiration to the global community in overcoming global conflict and building international peace. So I'll first briefly touch on His Holiness's philosophy and approach to human rights and world peace and the lessons that the international community has taken inspiration from. And then I'll look at kind of like a call to action for young Tibetans, so and the Tibetan community in general. So what we can apply from His Holiness's teachings in our everyday lives and also in our collective struggle for freedom. So firstly, we know that the reality in many places of the world is one of human rights abuse, war, upheaval, violent conflict, extremism, leading to various forms of human suffering, including refugee flows, internal displacement, human insecurity. But His Holiness has taught in different kinds of forums, so in his in-person teachings, as well as his facilitation of dialogues, conferences, his outreach to schools, whether it be primary school age or universities. His Holiness has addressed some common themes. So these are including universal responsibility, achieving change through nonviolence, so participating in active forms of resistance through nonviolence, and a commitment to ethics and universal human values. So these are values such as compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, self-discipline, which transcend the spiritual or religious idea of ethics, but also, secular human values. So His Holiness emphasizes this idea of human education as being really central to building international peace. His Holiness has also emphasized inner peace and resilience. So this idea that only through building inner peace and building a sense of inner peace, and then in turn building peaceful families, peaceful communities, and then ultimately building international peace. And His Holiness is also very practical in his orientation and his teaching. So he's emphasized practical action based on logic and education to ultimately achieve peaceful outcomes. So in terms of lessons for the international community, again, His Holiness has facilitated dialogues with a range of people and bringing together people to share stories and experiences to identify common struggles and common challenges and common goals. And through this facilitation of different conferences and dialogues and meetings, His Holiness has enabled the creation of inclusive and creative solutions to global challenges and to overcoming conflict. And so these dialogues have included dialogues with youth leaders, with young peace builders from conflict zones around the world, so from different countries and religions, cultures, ethnicities affected by conflict. Dialogues with representatives from the world's major religious traditions, so facilitating interfaith dialogues, because we know that religious field, at least religious extremism, field conflict is also a huge part of contemporary challenges facing the world, as well as dialogues facilitating exchange between scientists and religious leaders. So thinking about how secular ethics, in a sense, scientific or secular ideas of society, also religious ideas. So the kind of lessons that His Holiness has been able to spread around the world and inspire leaders and communities around the world include managing and overcoming conflict non-violently, so transforming conflicts through peaceful change, drawing on human values of compassion, tolerance, coexistence in building peaceful communities, and also drawing on communities' own resources, so in a practical way as well. So just thinking, what are the resources within a community that can, transform conflict settings, both kind of material resources, but also spiritual, cultural resources that communities can draw upon. And then kind of related to that, building a sense of inner strength and resilience in taking on the work of transforming conflict situations, and also the importance of self-compassion in the service of helping others and in working towards larger goals. So I'll just briefly conclude with kind of what young Tibetans, in particular, but the Tibetan community around the world, can kind of draw upon in His Holiness's teachings and example in his work for world peace and human rights. And so I think one thing is important in the importance of recognizing our oneness. So kind of going beyond just our self-identity as Tibetans or Tibetan Buddhists, or but also recognizing our commonality with other communities and other movements who also are, experiencing similar struggles. And so I think if we identify common goals and challenges, similar to how His Holiness facilitates dialogues across religious faiths, across cultural communities, if the Tibetan community can also network and connect with others from a range of disciplines, cultural backgrounds, experiences, then I think in that way we can develop more creative and innovative strategies for the Tibet cause. And I think otherwise, if we focus too much on our identity just as Tibetans or as a Tibetan movement, of course that's important, but it can also become a bit too insular. And so I think His Holiness has made huge achievements by maintaining Tibet in global perspective. So that's important not only to build relationships and networks with other communities, other movements, other causes, but also to create politically kind of viable and pragmatic solutions to the challenges that we face. And I will also say that I think while also emphasizing Tibetan unity, I think that's a crucial lesson that His Holiness has, or teaching that His Holiness has emphasized. But also recognizing the diversity of the Tibetan diaspora, and so also drawing strengths from different expressions of what it means to be Tibetan, and different kind of skills and talents that exist in our diaspora. I think that's also really important to further progress the Tibetan cause in the human rights and political sense. And at the same time, His Holiness always emphasizes the importance of drawing inner strength from our identity as Tibetans, so both the kind of culturally and spiritually remembering who we are in our everyday lives. I think that's really important because we can draw we can draw strength from that. And also that's how, the global community, even in our everyday interactions, they can learn about Tibet just through just the Tibetan nature and through, practicing those values and those principles that His Holiness teaches us about compassion and tolerance, and kind of embracing our Tibetanness and using it not only in professional ways or in our struggle for Tibet as a movement, but also in our everyday interactions with people. So I might leave it there for now, but I look forward to the discussion after the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. That was very insightful. There was a lot there, so I'm sure there will be lots of follow-on questions during the discussion session on this theme. Then I might turn to our second panelist, Doreen Benzim Punsola, who will speak from the political perspective. Benzim Punsola.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel very glad and very honored to be part of this discussion, crediting His Holiness with whatever he has done for us and being grateful to His Holiness. So I will be speaking from the political perspective as to the contribution of His Holiness in the political sphere of Tibet. I will divide it into two, pre-exile and post-exile, because a lot of people have in their mind that His Holiness is a father of democracy and then he set up a democratic system in exile. However, a large part of that work was done when he was in Tibet. So let us begin with the time when His Holiness has to accept the state responsibility at the very young and tender teenage of 16. So just imagine at the age of 16 where we are and where His Holiness was. So even at that time, it was quite imminent that China was going to invade Tibet and the Tibet was going to be taken over by China. But still, 16 or 8 years of age, and he took the responsibility. So that is one of the most important political contributions from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He could have left it to the region or to the number of cabinet ministers there to do the work, but somehow he accepted the responsibility. And secondly, after accepting the responsibility, he has not only stayed as a head of the state, he has practically tried to change the whole legal and political system in Tibet, which was quite traditional and highly aristocratic in nature. So I remember His Holiness giving a speech where he tried to, amend the legal system, which was quite exclusive to in different categories. However, he tried to make it a very common legal system. We can call it a judicial system. So even before introducing democracy, he started with the legal system itself. And soon after China took over Tibet, His Holiness has to go to China several times, especially in 1954. He has to speak with the Chinese leadership, the top Chinese leaders like Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, against his own wishes for the sake of Tibet to mitigate the Tibet issue. So at such a young age of between 16s to 20s, it is really a heavy and uphill task to handle the political situation. However, after His Holiness came into exile, so let us also credit His Holiness the decision of escaping to Tibet to India as one of the most important works of His Holiness in terms of looking from the political perspective, because had His Holiness not escaped into India, we would not have enjoyed the kind of political stand that we have and the struggle that we are doing at the international stage. So after His Holiness came into exile, primarily, despite having a lot of multiple challenges in terms of economy, in terms of culture, in terms of people being, dispersed everywhere, His Holiness has not given up the hope, and he has introduced the democratic system with the setting up of parliament on 2nd of September 1960, which we call as a Democracy Day. So that particular introduction of parliament system was one of the most important basic establishment of a democratic system. However, it was not just introduced and it was not just established. His Holiness has gradually tried to transform the whole political system into a modern democracy. So you can say that His Holiness is not just a leader, he is a pioneer of Tibetan democratic system. He is the father of a democratic system. We should be very grateful, and not just grateful, very fortunate to have him in our presence, and in his presence we are enjoying the democracy. So if you look from the 1960s to 1990s, the democratic system was very gradual in the progress, because Tibetans were not so educated as of now. So the democratic process was very gradual. However, in 1991, there was what we can say are stark changes in the democratic process, where His Holiness has totally transformed the parliament. He increased the members of the parliament. And at the same time, he also tried to introduce a cabinet, which is not just an appointed cabinet, but also an elected cabinet, even though not directly by the people, but at least by what we call as an indirect system through the parliament members. So we can say that in 1991, His Holiness introduced the Tibetan Charter. Even before that, back in 1963, he envisioned a future Tibetan constitution, which was quite unthinkable to a leader of his age at that time. So in 1991, he introduced a Tibetan Charter. He set up the Constitution Assembly, which we can call it technically. And then finally, the charter was signed. And then in 2000, His Holiness has introduced something called electing the head of the cabinet. We called at that time Chief of Kalyan. In Tibetan version, we call it Untitled, right? So Untitled was for the first time directly elected with the help of His Holiness, with the help of the Tibetan people, and it was never a wrong decision. We never regret that we had to elect the head of the state or head of the government as of now. So there are a few changes that happened gradually. And later in 2011, as we all know that His Holiness has totally relinquished the political authority. So no leadership can do that when his authority is so powerful, when his authority is so much trusted. If you look at Thailand as of now, the king is enjoying so much power that it goes beyond what he was entitled to. So no country or no leader can expect that the leader like His Holiness can, give you a power to determine the future course of political, the political situation for the Tibetans, whether it is about Tibetans inside Tibet or outside Tibet. So when His Holiness has introduced a political system of democracy, it is also the antithesis of what the Chinese government often accuses His Holiness of having an autocratic power, holding into the power, and the issue of Tibet. It's highly talked about Dalai Lama's power by the Chinese government. So it has totally went against it. His Holiness has introduced it, and no Chinese government has ever done that so far. So the Chinese government should be quite ashamed of what they are doing inside Tibet and other territories under them. So what we can say is, it is not just because of the political system that was changed by His Holiness. I think a lot can be credited with the education system itself. If we are not having the educational opportunity that we had, like you and I, we would not have understood what democracy is. We would not have understood what human rights is. So His Holiness is something from where we draw all the power. He is like a magnet where we draw the educational power, we draw the human rights power, where we draw the political power. So the fifth Dalai Lama started holding onto the power, but it was at the behest of the Mongolian government at that time. However, the 14th Dalai Lama is happily, as he said, relinquishing the political power with a trust and faith in the Tibetan people, that the people of Tibet will finally decide the future democratic process or the future politics of Tibet. So I think if we look at the nature of Tibetan democracy, a lot can be learned from His Holiness. And one of the most beautiful and important thing that we can do to His Holiness while he is present is that we must implement the democratic process quantitatively and qualitatively, which means that we must take part in the electoral process with a mindset that it was a blessing. And when you accept the blessing with a good heart and with a sincerity, then it will really be able to His Holiness would be really happy to see that the Tibetans are practicing democracy in such a way he has expected. So what I'm trying to tell you is that after 40 years, maybe like in 3 or 4 decades, the people of Tibet will not have the fortune of having His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama as we are having now. So at that time, if the Tibetan people are able to retain the democratic process, if the Tibetan people are able to quantitatively and qualitatively practice democracy, that is the best gift that is going to be for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That's all I can say for the time being. I will wait for the question and answer to follow up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Penta Putsula. That was very insightful. A lot of history there, and I think a lot that we can, continue to discuss during the discussion session. So thank you very much for that. So next I'll turn to our third panelist, Pema Dokala, and Pema will speak on the theme of education. So I might hand over to Pamela.
Thank you, Ladala. So because we're celebrating Network Week in Australia, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land I stand on today, the Daruk and Gurungai people. I would like to pay my deepest respect to the elders past and present. And before I begin, I would also like to make it really clear that whatever I speak today is based on some facts, but mostly personal opinion and self-reflection. And so, as Ladala mentioned, I'll be talking about the path that His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has shaped for us Tibetans in terms of education since his escape to India in 1959, and why I feel grateful for His Holiness's visionary plan and guidance for the education of Tibetan refugees. And I'll wrap up by talking briefly about what we can do to repay his gratitude. So back in April of 1959, His Holiness arrived in Missouri and met with the then Indian Prime Minister Pandit Nehru. And the very first thing that they discussed about was the way forward to educate the Tibetan refugee kids. And His Holiness has on many occasions talked very fondly about the interest and the concern that Pandit Nehru had shown regarding education for the Tibetan kids. And then I believe eventually the first Tibetan residential school was set up in Missouri, and it had some 50 students, and this was like in early 60s, right before he escaped to India. So, and also at a public talk in 2006, His Holiness stated that after reaching India, he was devoted to setting up schools and providing standard modern education more than setting up religious institutions, because he believed that, the lack of modern education was the obvious reason why we lost our country to China. And so I think it's really extraordinary that from very early on, His Holiness had this vision and he acted on it as soon as he reached India. And we really have come a long way from the humble beginnings. And today the Department of Education oversees about 73 Tibetan schools. And His Holiness's guidance didn't just stop with the first school opened. He was a constant support and a guiding light throughout all these years. And he has always emphasized, like now and then, the importance of quality modern education while preserving our traditional cultural values and language. So this idea has really, really shaped the education policy of the Tibetan schools in India. And so this really ties in with the secular ethics education module, which I think has universal value. Because today with material growth and technological innovation, our emotional well-being and inner values are ever so important. And personally, I had the privilege of attending a few different Tibetan schools in India. And I must say that my self-identity and growth as a person has been hugely, hugely influenced and shaped by the teachers and friends I met in the Tibetan schools. And it will continue to do so going forward. So because I grew up in a residential or a boarding school, if you may say so, like I've learned self-responsibility, self-worth, sharing and caring, because we had to live with like different Tibetan kids in a what we called kimtang, like in a shared accommodation. So I had this strong sense of community and belonging from early on. And but when I was at school, I was basically a kid, so I took a lot of these opportunities given to me as granted. But as you grow up and reflect, it's very daunting to imagine, like, what if there was no Tibetan school set up that time? What if, like, I've not had these opportunities given to me? Where would I be today? And honestly, I don't know, because at very young age, I came to India, like with hope of getting modern education, and my family back home has all these hopes in me. So like without the schools already set up there to receive me and to welcome me, I really don't know what I would be today. So personally, like, I just can't be more grateful for the school that I've been in India. And honestly, I don't think like I can pay the gratitude of His Holiness in this lifetime, at least, because there's just so much to be grateful for. Like, you just think about it. And since I left Tibet when I was 7, and coming to India, I feel like every step that I've taken and everything that I've done, it was all because of His Holiness's blessing. So it's just countless. Like, so there's no way I can just repay that back, like in this lifetime at least. So, but I think each of us can do some self-reflection and see how much of the twin goal of education as set up by His Holiness have you met so far, and just being like really true to your self-growth, and then continuing to learn and unlearn, and making sure that we contribute back to the Tibetan community directly or indirectly in your own way, and also keeping your Tibetan identity alive. And I say your because I don't think there is just 1 or 2 boxes to tick in order to prove your Tibetanness. And also, like, I feel like it's Tibetanness is all about how you really feel from within. And I think Samgala also had shared the same kind of sentiment, and I'd like to agree with her as well. I'd just like to conclude my speech here, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you very much for sharing your personal story. I thought that was really great, and I think it was good to bring that sort of dimension into this discussion. And there are, I think, themes that we can draw out, and as I said with the previous panelists, I think there's a lot that we can discuss during the discussion session. I just hope we have time for all the things that we need to talk about. So we have our 4th panelist, Tawang Thuptenla. I invite him to talk on the theme of the environment. So Tawang, over to you.
Thank you, Ladala, and thank you, Gonglamapala, for the opportunity to participate today. It is a privilege to share this platform with the other panel members and other for the purposes of celebrating and expressing and discussing our gratitude to His Holiness. When Gongala invited me to speak about this topic of the environment, it was actually serendipitous because I've been thinking about this issue a lot recently. His Holiness has made many notable contributions to the cause of environmentalism, but I'd like to focus on one key issue, something that His Holiness has recently reiterated his commitment to, which is the issue of the climate emergency. And so I'll start by explaining why I've also been thinking about this issue. From November 2019 through to this January, as every Australian would be aware of, but as we speak to a global audience, in this period, Australia experienced a climate change catastrophe, possibly the most stunning case the world has experienced so far. Forest fires, or bushfires, as we call them, destroyed more than 27 million acres, over 1 billion animals died, not including the hundreds of billions of insects. As a father, I've got 2 small children. you naturally think about the future a lot. And in the face of these fires, I was struck, like many Australians, with a sense of how urgent the climate change emergency really is, and worried about the future for my children. Now, this is actually rather silly given how many warnings about climate change we have known about for decades, but the scale and ferocity of the fires in Australia made the reality clear, more than any statistics or scientific explanations could. Scientific predictions are that we have possibly left it too late to avoid catastrophic climate change, and if you observe the behaviour of the world's so-called leaders, the chances appear low that humanity will take unified action in time to avoid some of even the worst case scenarios. So if you're paying attention, if you can, this is terrifying. We're talking about a climate that is inhospitable to human civilization within my children's lifetimes. It can seem hopeless. The science is known. We know what we need to do, and the technical solutions to solve climate change are here, or they're on the horizon. What humanity is lacking is the hope and the unity and the will to do something. In this regard, it is clear. His Holiness and those that follow his teachings have something vital and necessary to support the climate change struggle. His Holiness actually released a book 2 days ago called Our Only Home, dealing specifically with the climate crisis. It was released on the 12th of November. It is a plea from His Holiness to world leaders to do what is needed to preserve a future for our children. It's a vital and timely contribution by His Holiness, but the contents of the book should already be known to all Tibetans. Let me explain why. And to explain, I'll have to take you back in time to give a bit of context. So it's 1988 and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was formed, the world's most authoritative body on climate science. But outside of scientific circles, few were paying attention to their predictions. Undoubtedly, if more had, we would not be facing the existential threat we are facing now. But that was in 1988, so the IPCC was created. And in 1989, as we all know, His Holiness deservedly won the Nobel Peace Prize. And the following year, December 1990 to be precise, His Holiness held the Kala Chakra in Sarnath. And I'd like to read to you a few excerpts from what His Holiness said at the Kala Chakra nearly 30 years ago to this day. Global warming has brought changes in climate, including making perennial snow mountains melt, thereby adversely affecting not only human beings, but also other living species. In the past, the perennial snow mountains of Tibet had very thick snow. Older people say that these mountains were covered with thick snow when they were young, and that the snows are getting sparser, which may be an indication of the end of the world. The continuing decline of forests in many parts of the world, including America, is adversely affecting the already changing global climate, thus upsetting the lives not only of mankind, but also of all living beings. It is a responsibility of us who speak of the welfare of all sentient beings to contribute toward this. Since I too have a responsibility in this matter, i.e. to work for the protection of the environment and to see that the present and future generations of mankind can make use of refreshing shade and fruits of trees, I bought these seeds of fruit-bearing trees with part of my Nobel Peace Prize money to be distributed now to people representing different regions. All the continents of the world are represented here during this Kala Chakra gathering. These seeds have been kept near the Kala Chakra mandala for purification and blessings. Since these seeds of apricot, walnut, papaya, guava are suitable for planting under varying geographical conditions, experts in respective places should be consulted on their planting and care, and thus you all should see my sincere aspiration is fulfilled. That was His Holiness in December of 1990, and even then clearly paying attention to the science and respecting the science. Those seeds, you would imagine, would now be mature fruit trees, providing the shade and fruit His Holiness intended. And we Tibetans born since those trees were planted are also coming into maturity, and we can make a difference. Undoubtedly, His Holiness's latest book, released a few days ago, will provide wisdom on the issue to those who read it. But many of its ethical, political, and philosophical principles are within us Tibetans and are a part of who we are, thanks to the guidance of His Holiness for our entire lives. And I think all of the previous panel members have spoken in the various ways that these ethical and political and philosophical frameworks guide us when we, whether we think about politics, education, or how we fight for human rights. His Holiness has instilled in our generation of Tibetans the teachings of compassion, interdependence, and responsibility that, if we embrace and try to live by, would lead us to engage with the issue of climate change, as His Holiness has done for 30 years. I said earlier that I believe that His Holiness as a leader, we as his followers, are uniquely placed to bring solutions to the problem of a lack of hope, unity, and will in addressing climate change. The world is fractured along so many fault lines, divided and confused. His Holiness's leadership of the Tibetan people and Tibetan Buddhism through our ongoing existential crisis is a unique example to the world on how to maintain hope free of conflict and hatred, to respect and accept differences, and with compassion advocate for rational and mutually beneficial solutions. We Tibetans can help divided communities, torn along ideological and political divides, find common purpose. For me and many Australians, prior to the bushfires, the impact of climate change was a worry for countries susceptible to rising seas, like Pacific Islands. It wasn't a concern for us, not our families. It took bushfires devastating our country for me to take this issue as seriously as is needed. And it's something which jeopardises the survival of not only humanity, but as His Holiness stated in 1990, all the sentient beings we share this planet with. We cannot afford to wait for more catastrophes to shock us or into taking responsibility. His Holiness has recommended concrete action we can take to combat climate change, most notably encouraging vegetarianism. But I think we as Tibetans have an additional responsibility to stand by His Holiness's side and in a uniquely Tibetan way engage on the climate change issue in our communities, NGOs, and in the political arena. This, I think, would be the most meaningful display of gratitude for all His Holiness has done to guide us and inspire us on a range of topics and issues and a range of aspects of our lives, including the struggle that we have before us as a species. So, look, I thank again everybody for providing this opportunity, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Salama. And I think, the issue of climate change is something that we, as the discussants here, can all relate to, given that we have hopefully have quite a few decades to look forward to still, and especially as you mentioned with family, it's an issue that's going to be have a very big impact on their lives, on the lives of our children. So thank you for that. I think there are issues that we need to. I definitely want to draw on you for to just expand on. But perhaps the way to start the discussion session might be if I, as the moderator, if I take the liberty of asking maybe one question to each of the panelists, and then as we discuss each of those questions, I'd invite the other panelists to jump in, make this a free-flowing discussion of that particular question. If you have any thoughts to share, and once we've done that, I'll also open the floor, and I'd welcome any questions that you might have for each other or comments that you'd like to share on any of the other themes. So with that, I might start off with a question for Tsering Samkala. So one point that you noted, I mean, there's a lot there in what you said. One point that you noted was, you touched on was, how His Holiness has initiated the dialogue with scientists, and I know that's part of the long-running kind of discussions over several decades now, as part of the Mind Life kind of discussion series. I was interested in how you see this engagement and what it means to you as a Tibetan, and if any of the other panelists have thoughts on this point, we'll welcome your thoughts as well. Dingla?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Halala. Yeah, that's a great question. I think it actually reminds me of what Pamela actually mentioned about the how His Holiness has always emphasized modern education and the importance of science and importance of science for progress and for achieving happiness and all those kinds of things for communities, but also the importance of preserving traditional values and the importance of emotional well-being and inner value, and that inner sense of peace. And so I think those dialogues are so important, because I think also in even fields of neurology and philosophy and physics, His Holiness has talked about how there are parallels between the most advanced kind of findings of physicians or scientists, and how these go back to centuries and centuries old traditional knowledge that that Buddhists and other religious practitioners have known for for a long time. And so I think that section of modern science and education and that traditional cultural heritage and knowledge is so important. And for me as a Tibetan, that's really empowering too, actually, because even myself, and I find out about facts about the universe, or any kind of scientific finding, and even the importance of equanimity and balance in preservation of the environment and understanding the climate crisis, as Tongla mentioned. These are all ultimately, you can find the essence of these teachings and guidance even just from His Holiness teachings and Tibetan Buddhists, or even across religious faiths. You can find those teachings there too. So I think that's the way I kind of value those dialogues.
Thanks, Darren. I completely share your thoughts on, share your views on this. For me, it's a source of great confidence and kind of, pride that we have a culture that can engage with the kind of latest in science, in a range of fields of science. And it's such a good way to disprove, what some of the propaganda we get from the Chinese Communist Party about how backward Tibetans are, how backward our traditions and our culture and identity, is. The fact that, it's hard to see any other major religion being able to engage with science with such confidence. So the fact that His Holiness is able to do that, and that are kind of, religious scholars, I'd say scholars, because I think, scientific scholars in many ways, as we've realized through these discussions, are able to engage with the latest in science and the best and brightest scientists. It's a great source of pride and confidence for myself. So, I definitely share your views on that. I think it's also interesting that, His Holiness is able to use that platform to contribute the value of our culture to broader kind of global audience. So we talked about all the different themes, but I think this is also one channel, because science is, the medium. I guess for a lot of people in the world, I can't speak for everyone, but for a lot of people, that's the basis of, truth, that we're taught through modern education. And the fact that we're able to inject our culture and the logic and, the principles of our culture through science is, I think, one important way in which His Holiness is contributing to, the, betterment of humanity, I guess. So thanks very much for that. Any other thoughts from the other panelists on this theme? Tong, I see you raising your hand.
I just wanted to agree with both of you. And I guess bringing it back to the topic that I was trying to address is that 100% I agree, Lada, that we as Tibetans can feel some affirmation when His Holiness invites, Nobel Prize winning or the best in their field, to come and discuss complex notions of physics or neurology or neuroscience. And invariably, these experts go away from these discussions having learned something. And I think a part of what that says is that we're a culture which is open to the notion of being confronted with another truth. And we're open, we are flexible enough and agile enough intellectually as a culture to be able to stand on our own 2 feet intellectually and listen to others with respect, and then share and find common ground, and then accept differences. And I think that's sort of, for me, the gift our culture can give to a kind of a fractured Western civilization in many ways. You see discourse that's happening between cultures. You see discourse happening between economic and political ideology, which is incapable of appreciating the possibility that there's benefit to discourse, or that there's a way to have discourse which can be mutually beneficial at the same time that doesn't undermine your own belief in yourself. So, and I think in regards to climate change, we're seeing this. We're seeing people of a particular faith background or ideological background unable to engage with science without feeling confronted by an alternative view of reality. And that's why I think we as Tibetans who can go and have a sense of responsibility for the climate crisis, like His Holiness does, can take those sorts of steps confidently into those discussions and bring a different mentality, which I think would be very welcome and beneficial to that sort of especially in our country, in Australia. We know how painful the climate change discussion has been for many decades. And I think the ability to have it in a way that's consistent with our culture would be educative. So, I just wanted to add that.
No, that's very true. I think there's a lot of agreeing going on here, which is to be expected and is a good thing. I think your point on about how ours is a culture that's willing to pursue truth and find out more about truth, and and when you find that truth, whether it's from your own culture or from elsewhere, then you're able to accept it and integrate into your who you are, your philosophies, your kind of way of life is a really great point. And I think it goes back to something that Pamela mentioned during her remarks, which is the importance of not being insular. So it's important to kind of be who we are, but that kind of the collective kind of wisdom of who we are in our culture, that can evolve, and that's kind of shown by the fact that His Holiness is engaging with science and drawing some of that into Buddhist philosophy. I guess he's encouraging Buddhist scholars to take up those truths as well as kind of sharing what we know, and I guess informing, being able to inform the truth that scientists accept through our culture as well. So thank you for that. I might turn now to Tenzin Pinzola. So one point that in your remarks that I was hoping that you might be draw out sort of further on is what His Holiness did for the Tibetan people while in Tibet, because you did touch on that. It's a particularly sort of pertinent issue because the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda keeps bringing this up about how I don't need to parrot what they say, and because we all understand what they say, and I'm not sort of asking you to parrot what they're saying, but I think if you can elaborate more on all that His Holiness sort of did for the Tibetan people while in Tibet, I think that would be useful, and hopefully that would be insightful for those in the audience who might have questions based on what they've heard from the Chinese Communist Party, and there's a lot of people out there parroting exactly what the CCP is saying. So if I may invite you to do that, Tenzin Pinzola.
I think since Tibet was taken over by China, one of the reasons they have said is the liberation of Tibet. So we really don't know from where we were liberated. We were not under any of the imperial colony. We were not colony at that time as well. So one of the reasons they always talk about as they propagate is liberating us from the fiefdom or the slavedom of the Lamaism or the aristocratic system. So now if you look at Tibet, particularly if you look at the Tibetan Autonomous Region, you're seeing that they have not democratized the Tibetan political system. They have only monopolized the Communist Party's power. That's what you can see so far. And they have no guts to hold an election, which is open and fair and free election. They don't have a guts because they knew that if the Tibetans were allowed to vote, what kind of vote it will come out. So they have always been very autocratic, and they have always been monopolizing the political structure. However, exactly opposite what we have in exile is a highly democratized, not only at the top level, but also at the grassroots level. If you look at the Tibetan settlement, you have a settlement officers who are elected. You have, if you go into India and look at many of the settlement, not just some, many of the settlement, they have their own local assemblies, which they call as Sane Tuzo. So the way they elect the leaders. So even at the school itself, we have a different way of, electing a leadership. At school, you elect a captain. In the classes, you elect a monitor. So the democratic process was not just from at the top level; it was at the lowest level itself. We can call it as a grassroots level democracy. So you and I learn the democratic process when we come from the school. Not just that when we go to college and when we grow up and get gray our hair and then we realize it. So any person, any witness, you can call it any judge, unbiased judge can say that what His Holiness has done to the Tibetan people outside Tibet, even the Chinese cannot do that. That's what we can say. So what the Chinese government is propagating so far in the last 60 years has exactly been opposite to what His Holiness has been doing. So it is a big lie exposed on the part of China. So that's why I always say that the Tibetan people must implement the democratic process as gifted and blessed by His Holiness. And now the responsibility falls on us, where we have to continue the good blessing or walk on the path of good blessing, where we must fairly elect a leader. We must freely elect our leader. We must, hold an election where there is open-mindedness, where the people's views are highly respected, and there is no much slinking. And of course, we hardly had it, except for a very, very few reasons. So what I can conclude here is that China, even though they are one of the most powerful countries in the world, they have not been able to crush the Tibetan spirit, because we have introduced a system where people's respect to each other for the political views are highly maintained. So long as this democratic process continue, China will still be not able to suppress the Tibetan struggle. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Tinsiputala. I think it is quite ironic, isn't it, when the Chinese Communist Party, keep talking about how they've liberated the Tibetan people, but the exact opposite is what's happened. And you hear, I think news, maybe a couple of months ago or quite recently, there was news about how 500,000 Tibetans are in sort of essentially concentration camps, kind of like the same similar sorts of camps that they have in Xinjiang. So it's the exact extreme opposite of liberation. That happening in Tibet at the moment. I think one something that I wanted to kind of share my thoughts on is, when you look at the period between, His Holiness's investiture with political power in Tibet, as you said, as you reminded us earlier, at the tender age of 16, that period through to when he came into exile, all the things that he was setting in motion, I think it's something that often gets lost in I guess people's views of history, because there's all this propaganda from the Chinese, and there's a lot of focus on what's happened since we've come into exile. And so that's one thing that I just wanted to kind of share my thoughts on. So for one, I think the broad context is important. So Chinese and those parroting the Chinese government's propaganda and talk about how Tibetans were slaves and serfs, and His Holiness was an oppressor, all that sort of thing. And when you look at the situation on the ground, it's very different. Of course, there were a lot of Tibetans. The challenges in Tibetan society, as there always is in every society, there were difficulties in the system, but that was the case in a lot of societies, until they modernized and democratized and so on. So Tibet, at the time, social structure wasn't different to a lot of other countries at the time, and not very different to, more, I guess, economically and maybe politically developed countries, how they were maybe, a few decades before, or maybe like in half a century or to a century earlier. So, the fact that Tibetans had a system that some aspects of which were, a bit backward, it isn't a surprise to anyone, right? It's not like we're a static society that would never change. It's almost like, it was in the process of changing. And when you look at the well-being of Tibetans at the time, you read, books by people like Charles Bell, who actually saw the situation on the ground at the time. And he talks about how the Tibetan people in general, the general population, were much better off, in terms of their economic or, their material well-being than the masses in China or India at the time. So this is in the early part of the 20th century. Now, this is what someone from the British Indian Mission at the time was reporting. So it's very interesting. It just shows you how much of a lie that the Chinese, or like, the CCP's version of history is, that, Tibetans poor, oppressed, Chinese are kind of, advanced, happy, all that sort of thing. They come and liberate the Tibetan people. So that was the context. And then when you think about what His Holiness did to reform the society, and I think you touched on this, Dalai Lama, but I just wanted to expand on this. After he took on temporal authority over Tibet, it didn't take that long. So I think he took over temporal authority in November 1950, and by 1952, when he was probably like 17 or 18 years old, His Holiness has already begun implementing significant reforms to improve the lives of the poorest Tibetans and create a more equitable society. So he established a reform office. I think in Tibetan it's called Legum, which was tasked with overseeing the taxation system and abolishing hereditary debt. And I've studied economic history. You look at the modernization process in countries like Japan, and even in China, as late as, like, say, the 1970s, land reform, taxation reform. Those are things that, are the initial steps in economic reform, in economic modernization and social reform. And His Holiness was already doing that, much earlier than, Deng Xiaoping in China. His Holiness was already doing that in the early 1950s, and at the tender age of 17 or 18. And, it reminds me of your point earlier, Enzo Consola, about, asking ourselves, what were we doing when we were 16 or 17 or 18, right? It is quite amazing. And then, you talked about judicial reform as well. I think that came a bit later. But I think in Tibet, when it's Gyship based on what I was. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, judicial reform system, and that would have formed the basis of an independent judicial system, which was lacking in a traditional governance structure in Tibet at the time. And ironically, ironically, it was by that time the Chinese controlled a lot of Tibet. I think they already had people in Lhasa, and it was the Chinese overlords that actually obstructed those reforms from proceeding. So it just completely jars with, contradicts, what they say about His Holiness being the oppressor, Chinese coming and liberating the people, and I don't see these facts, raised out in public arenas that often. And I'd like to thank you for kind of, bringing it to our awareness and for reminding me of these facts as well. So just something I wanted to share with you. Not sure if you have more to add.
No, just 50 minutes. I'm gonna make just 30 seconds. Like if the Chinese leadership are very honest, they would have to confess that they never expected His Holiness to introduce democracy. They never expected, but it happened. And if you look at the impact of the Tibetan democracy now in exile, they will have to monitor. They will be monitoring. They will be interfering in our democratic elections. And they will have to do it cutting across 25 countries. We have a Tibetans across 25 countries participating in the coming 2020 or 2021 election. So you look at the United States, one of the most powerful country. China will have to focus on one country, but when it comes to the exact election, they will have to focus on 25 countries. Just imagine the impact of the Tibetan democracy.
Yeah. So it's it's a very funny situation, but I think I think these facts need to be heard, and I think we're hopefully through this event we're able to do that, and also highlight the many reasons to be grateful to His Holiness. So thank you, Punzola. Other panelists, would you like to share any further thoughts, or discuss this particular question further?
I was just going to add, that was a fascinating discussion. I would just add that I think that the Chinese Communist Party has to work so hard to create some kind of narrative or some kind of image, or which is of course has no basis in historical facts or any truth. They have to work so hard because I think His Holiness and everything that he represents and all the international support and reverence that he has gained is like a refutation of the Chinese Communist ideology, and its ideas about achieving economic development and progress for the Tibetan people, and they're so happy. But I think His Holiness always kind of asks the question, despite whatever material progress has been made, and always there's the question, okay, well, economic development for whom, for whose interest? But even past that, whatever material progress can be made, there'll always be that inner spiritual poverty that Tibetans will always have. Chinese occupation, and how can one be happy when one's not free? And so happiness and freedom and spiritual freedom and inner freedom is what His Holiness represents, I think, and I think that's why and he has such an innate appeal amongst not just Tibetans but the whole international community. And so I think, that narrative that the Chinese Communist Party works so hard to push out into the world will never have real substance because it just collapses under His Holiness's example and those really fundamental teachings about, what it means to be human and what is real happiness.
Yeah, no, it's saying. I think that's very true. As I was saying, there's a lot of agreeing going on, and I think I must agree with everything that you said there. Tamala, did you see that you're not on mute? Did you want to add anything, or?
Just that all these narratives that China is trying to spin around. I feel like, especially this year with coronavirus and, how they dealt with it, like with secrecy, and that has led to all these, loss of lives all over the globe. So, and it kind of we didn't really have to do anything to kind of reveal what China's true color is, but it kind of just, came out by itself, because that, and I believe that's what His Holiness always had said, that we have the truth on our side and honesty on our side, we have nothing to hide. Whatever we're fighting for, we're fighting for truth and justice. If someone is supporting us, not because we're Tibetans or Tibet, but because of the truth, because that person believes in truth and justice. And so I've always looked that way in terms of when people come and they say, oh, I support Tibetan movement, and I never thought they liked me or that they liked the Tibetan. I've never taken it that way. I've always thought, okay, this is someone who supports the truth, and this is someone who wants justice to be delivered. So and I think this year, because of the pandemic, so I feel and just everybody, all the countries, every global citizens, they kind of had a glimpse of what China really is. And so I think it's going to not never get easier for them to spin out or to kind of like bring out all these stories that they usually do on like daily basis. They have missionaries, and so I'm just like, this year it's been bad, but on the other hand, you know what I'm saying? Like it's it's like the something's exploded. Like it's all there to see. It's
and it's very hard to suppress the truth indefinitely. And I think the experience this year, I agree that that's what this year's shown in many ways. And I think as you're saying, I think your point is that even for for the Tibetan people's kind of cause, because truth is on our side, if you're able to actually bring the truth out into the open, then whether you're Chinese or American or what your background might be, if you're someone who's open-minded enough to accept truths, whatever that might be, then that's a source of strength for our cause, and something that we can bring more and more people bring more and more people around and sort of behind our cause. So I think that's a very valid point. One aspect to this, just going back to the point that Dorian Tenzin made earlier. Like I think one interesting point is I often see in discussions about Tibet before Chinese invasion this sense of I think it's an erroneous kind of sense that Tibetan society at the time kind of never changes, and therefore it's like you compare kind of Tibet in 30s or 40s, like early 40s, and then you compare that to China in 2000 or 2020 kind of thing, and then you say, oh yeah, Tibetans benefit from being part of China, being being under the Chinese Communist Party's rule, all that sort of thing. And I find that that's something that we that's very clear to me as a Tibetan, but it's something that we need to look out for, because sometimes that creeps into even discourse between amongst Tibetans as well. It's when you look at what we've done in exile, it's very clear that we would never have been where we were in 1930 or 40 in the following decades. And you think about the reforms that I already mentioned, that His Holiness was already in the process of implementing. We would have been a very different nation, in the subsequent decades. And so I think it's very wrong to compare a static picture of Tibet to a dynamic picture of China and the rest of the world. So I'd encourage, so just it's something that I feel quite strongly about. So I just wanted to share it with you and encourage all of you to kind of, raise this whenever you hear it, whether it's from, your friends or colleagues at work or wherever. And I see Tong raising his hand, so,
Look, I think I know we probably don't have much time left, but since you've encouraged us to all jump in and share, just along the same, like I agree with Tiering. Like it was really insightful what you shared, Ladala, about some of the specific sort of policy changes Holiness was making as a 17-year-old. And you also mentioned the fact that Bell had sort of made observations about Tibet prior to the Chinese invasion, which were, he's sort of an unbiased sort of observer, so you can trust him. Yeah. And there was also, I think it might have been Bell, it might have been another sort of traveller through Tibet at that time, made an observation when they were travelling through a part of Tibet which actually where the locals did fishing. And they noted that there were central Tibetan government officials who would make essentially like a spot check or an audit of fishermen's nets. And they would go and with their finger try to poke a hole in the fisherman's net. And if the fisherman's net was so sort of finely woven that they couldn't fit their finger, they were fined. And that was sort of an official Tibetan government policy to preserve the fish stock, to enable sort of to ensure that smaller fish would not be caught by fishermen. And I think these sorts of elements of what our government, led by His Holiness at that time, is sort of, as you said, kind of not frequently part of the narrative, deliberately so by the Chinese, maybe accidentally by us. So anyway, I wanted to throw in that environmental, so that's quite brief, right? So I wanted to throw in that sort of anecdote that I'd heard about that sort of dynamic in the Tibetan sort of story at that time.
Right, yeah, thanks, Dalai. That's really insightful. Hopefully we'll have more time to discuss this. You know, if you're flexible, I know that we're getting close to time, but I think Tibettv are comfortable with the discussion sort of extending beyond our allotted 90 minutes. So if you're all willing and happy, then we can just continue our discussion beyond that point. And but you know, for now, I want to move on and ask a question to Hemala. So I really liked how you didn't just talk about the education and your kind of experience with education, but you also kind of talked about how we need to do something about it. So pivot to something that's a discussion that's more sort of action oriented. So I guess as Australian Tibetans, and there's lots of other as Dr. Punzo mentioned, is Tibetans all over the world, many in advanced economies, with who've had the opportunity for better quality education, more opportunities in life. I was wondering whether you had any thoughts on what we those Australian Tibetans and those other Tibetans, how we might be able to contribute to education, whether it's in India or Nepal or more broadly, across the Tibetan diaspora, what we might be able to do. And so any thoughts on that? I know it's a tricky question. I know we're not sort of trying to develop kind of new policy proposals here, but any thoughts would be much appreciated.
Yeah. So first of all, I think for us, for other young Tibetans like you who've grown up overseas since you were, I guess, born, or you were born overseas, or you were here since you were 1 or 2, it might be a bit different. But because I came here in my early 20s, so I had a very different experience from you guys, because I had been to school in India, and then I'd been to university in India, and then I came here, and then I had to I was a bit kind of lost, and then just trying to. It's a big change, and in India, in terms of education system, it's like you finish your high school, and then it's kind of like a written. There is a written definite path that you follow. You finish your bachelor's, then go on, do your master's, and then maybe if you're still interested, do a master of philosophy, or then do a PhD. That's the way it goes. But then after coming here, I realized that our education system and it relies so much on economic, that economic perspective of what you're going to do after this. Are you going to get work? How much are you going to earn? And so for me, it's been such a drastic change. And I just didn't know, because when I was in India, I had this thought in my mind, okay, I want to do this, this, this. But here it's because the environment has changed and the priorities has changed. So it was totally a different environment. And so I had to kind of manage and change my priorities because I have to be realistic at the end of the day. I just put in, and I was here by myself. I had no one to rely on. And so I guess in terms of what we can do for the Tibetans back in India or Nepal, I guess it's just really because I always feel like doing your best here, and then because I'm not really sure, like in terms of, like infrastructures and stuff like that, how things have changed, because it's been a while since I left school. So I don't really, and also the students have changed. Not many are coming from Tibet. So they might have changed, because earlier they were all these students in Tibetan schools who are from Tibet, so they had certain needs, and because all of them had like some commonalities, such as their parents were back in Tibet, and then they had, like no relatives or things like that. But now, because these kids in school, they already have their family and parents with them. So, but in terms of also, I think like in terms of infrastructure, like there are so many schools, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but because we are getting very less Tibetan kids from Tibet, it seems like the Tibetan schools have like lesser number of kids, and so I don't think we would need more of infrastructure because it's already there. And then but in terms of like scholarship, and providing a scholarship for really like bright students who could have like a lot of opportunities open for them if they could get into some universities in a Western country, and also just like get more opportunities and use their full potential, because if you're in a school in India, like of course there are a lot of like good points, but then in terms of the exposure, or in terms of like the support system, like it's I think it's a bit better here, but then but then from my personal experiences, like of course all the material well-being, like material being like support in terms of like the infrastructure in the school or in the classes, and the way the lecture is delivered online, or things like that, it's really good here. But then I felt like personally there is not much of interaction, like real genuine interaction among the students, because it's always like you're getting to know someone, and then it's end of the semester, and then you have to go to some other classes, and then it's all new students. So which was very different from India. Like in India, you would be in the same classes for like 2 to 3 years, or while the whole period you were at university. So you have these human interactions, and you form these relationships built on friendship, and and then you there's a lot to learn from other people, like through interaction and stuff like that. It's not only like that you learn from a lecturer. So that's something I really missed when I came here, because I had experienced the university life back in India, and so here I felt it was really very, very much individualistic, and it's all up to you. Like you just had to do your thing, and then on the flip side also, because you become more responsible, because it's all on you. Like you have to do it, or you have to just like I don't know, like it was weird, really weird when I first started here. But I think I'm not answering your question. But
no. I think it seems like there's the lesson is there's things to learn from on both sides. So not that we're talking about education kind of system or policy here, but it seems like there's lessons to be learned on both sides. And as people who've yourself, someone who's seen both sides, seems like there's natural opportunities to engage on this issue in the Tibetan diaspora and for the Tibetan education system in exile. I think one thing that you mentioned was coming to Australia, sounds like it felt quite isolating, the system here, but also the lack of kind of, people to turn to. And, networks are really important, whether you're studying or whether you're seeking employment, networks are always really important. So I think one thing that we can offer through this discussion here to other Tibetans, other young Tibetans who might be out there in Australia or elsewhere, is the willingness to talk to them. Like, if you do feel isolated or, lacking in terms of guidance and advice, then turn to other Tibetans, who might have been through similar kind of situations or who might have a very different kind of experience set that they can draw on to help inform you with your decisions and your life path. So I think, I'd be more than happy to talk to other Tibetans, and I'm always very happy to talk to Tibetans. So, and I think, you guys will probably feel the same way. So, shout out to anyone who's out there, maybe in a similar position. Feel free to reach out to us. And I feel that, people elsewhere as well, I'd encourage you to be willing to, help pull each other up, because there's so few of us, and we really each of us need to help each other reach our potential. Anyway, that's one of my takeaways from your response.
I'll just add one more last point.
Sure.
I think Hadala, you also kind of mentioned that, because when we're talking about like helping or supporting Tibetan students back in India, I always feel like it's not about maybe not among us, but like usually it's kind of like if you go to a university in one of the Western countries and then you have someone who goes to a university in India, there's kind of like looking at that way as the one who's going to a Western university is kind of a superior, or, whereas, of course, the universities in India lack infrastructure or like material support and stuff like that. But then I don't think we should be looking at these two as, like separate things. One is like kind of like giving some pedestal, whereas lowering the other. It's always about like same, we're equals, we both educating ourselves, and if there is like something that we can share like with each other through our experiences, or if we could help each other, and it's not only about just someone being at the receiving end, or because I think we have a lot to learn from the students who are in universities in India or Nepal, or like any other Asian countries, or like any other country other than the Western countries. So it's always to look at it that way. It's always better, because then we are open, and we know that learning can come from anywhere. Like it's not just. That's right. There's not just one point where you can learn. It's just open, and it can come from any direction. So that's my last point.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Two-way learning from anyone you can. I think that's the way to go. So I think I might turn to you for a question. So you spoke about the importance of engaging on climate change, including within our communities. So something that you might be able to share, any ideas or thoughts about how we can do it sort of more proactively?
I think as Tibetans, we're two things, right? One, we're a community, and secondly, we're individuals. I think as individuals, we can look to His Holiness's, as Sirila, I think, most eloquently sort of elaborated upon, there is like a complex architecture of philosophy His Holiness has built for us. I think sometimes, people look at His Holiness and they see like this happy, jovial figure who just emanates like a sense of well-being, and they get wrapped in this like simplistic notion of His Holiness. And then you start to read the things His Holiness says and speaks about, whether it's like politics or, engagement on scientific issues, and he weaves them together because he has such a holistic and broad understanding of life. like in a macro sense. And then if you dive deep, he has so much detail about how you can live a purposeful and meaningful life and contribute to the well-being of your community and the world. And so I think, if we can all individually as Tibetans take the time, and this is another form of education, I guess, take the time to, as much as our busy lives allow us, dive as deep as possible into both the secular and the spiritual teachings of His Holiness, we will better ground our own ethical behaviour in a way which will, this is going to sound really hocus pocus, but almost by magic, we will align ourselves with a way that will be better for them. We will be less materialistic, we will be less driven by our anxieties to consume and to be sort of unnecessarily competitive with our neighbours and Joneses. We will be more considerate of the well-being of other sentient beings. We will be more considerate of other people beyond our immediate sort of vicinity of our family and friends. We will think not just in a sense about people in our street, but a global sense. So, so I think individually, the simple sort of thing to do is to, as much as possible, read and listen to what His Holiness has to say. And I know that sounds maybe like an enormous task, but I think as Tibetans, that's something we can take some sort of action every day to try to engage with the immense sort of His Holiness has bestowed upon us this gift, which is this he has written and spoken so extensively about so many things that we need to take the time to try to to digest as much of that as possible. And secondly, then within our communities, again, I'm going to sound like a serious fan. The notion that within our communities we don't think too narrowly about how we as a community engage with the world. And I think the best thing to do again is to look at His Holiness' example. His Holiness does not walk the earth singly. At no point did he ever singularly walk around the planet talking about Tibet. He was always, like, if he landed in a location, he would always go and speak about the issues that were relevant to the people that he was speaking to. And then I think in the same way, we must be as proactive in engaging in the issues that are present in our own, around the communities that we are within. So as Australians, I think it means that our communities have to go out there and engage on environmental issues that are relevant to our Australian Tibetan community. And if you're in a Tibetan community in California, you need to go and, look at the model that His Holiness has built, look at the example that he sets in being engaged on issues beyond simply what is your, political or ideological narrow focus. And I think those two sort of ways, the individual and the collective, the guiding light is His Holiness.
Yeah, I think one thing that I can't kind of help but think about when we're listening to you is that kind of almost like that natural connection between His Holiness's teachings and I guess that which is rooted in Buddhist philosophy and Tibetan kind of values or culture, and the natural link between that and paying attention to the environment and climate change and those sorts of issues. When you think about the teachings of His Holiness, I think fundamentally it really boils down to, as I said, words that he just keeps uttering, every time we listen to his teachings or speeches, and that is the notion that you should help others when you can, and at the very least refrain from harming others. And if that's your guiding principle in life, then you are naturally going to care about the environment. You're naturally going to care about climate change. You're going to care about a lot of things, but it's natural that you really care about climate change and the environment. So yeah, it's. I think that's why we as Tibetans are naturally kind of drawn towards these issues, and it's also probably the reason why, you talked about the fishing nets back in Tibet. It's almost like, it's a direct kind of result of that broader kind of philosophical or, set of values that we were brought up with. I think that kind of basic principle is also a useful guide when you think about how we engage in the societies that we live in. So I think as Tibetans, one of our fundamental responsibilities, and this is something that His Holiness mentions repeatedly, is being a positive influence on wherever we are to those societies. And so, as Australian Tibetans, I think we have a responsibility and the opportunity to be a positive influence on our neighbours, on our colleagues and our friends, and share, and bring a sense of compassion, and bring a sense of kind of universal responsibility that His Holiness talks about into those discussions, and hopefully, be able to influence people that way. And I guess that directly applies to, talking about environment and climate change. And I'm sure, with summer fast approaching, or we might have more bushfires, and that'll be a discussion that we'll need to continue to have. But hopefully, being Tibetan, we can bring that perspective into those discussions. So I'm mindful that we are, past our scheduled kind of, end time. But does anyone have any last sort of final thoughts to share?
Yeah, I was just wondering, can you all have 1 or 2 minutes of closing remark to all of us, so that that will just end it very beautifully, that I guess. We can also compensate some of the points that we might have missed in all of us. So we were talking about the contribution of His Holiness in the Tibetan affairs, in the global affairs, in different fields. And particularly, as for me, I was talking about in the political field. So mostly I focus on the exiled political field, but also at the same time, we would also need to know that His Holiness' presentation of middle way and the 5-point peace plans are globally, and in terms of geopolitical situation, we can say it's a peace plan for the Asia, it's a peace plan for the whole world itself. So when we talk about middle way, we are not just talking about Tibetan having autonomy, we are also talking about China benefiting from Tibet. Whether it is about the minerals, whether it is about the environment, whether it is about the economy. So we must realize that if we have to be grateful of His Holiness' contribution in the political field, we just not be talking about how grateful His Holiness is or has been. We also have to be practical about what His Holiness has been so grateful to us. So there are 2 areas I can mention. One thing is that you and I are in an age where the Chinese also have the similar age of people in their own country. So they are going to grow up like us. We are going to grow like at the same time. We are their peers. We are their counterparts. So one of the best thing we can do to be grateful to His Holiness is that we can explain the way the CTA have a structure, the way how democratized the Tibetan exile society or political system is, and how the middle way will not only benefit the Tibetan, but how it will benefit the Chinese people itself. Because I remember when I was in Tape in the last 1 year, I met a lot of Chinese people. Tape is usually used to be full of Chinese, by the way. So I meet them, and when I talk to them about Tibet, they always feel that Tibet is something that needs to be that wanted to be separate from China. So they look at me like I am a separatist. So they look at His Holiness as a separatist. So when I explain to few of them the CTA setup, when I explain to them the middle way, they're kind of like surprised. So you and I cannot convince the Chinese inside China, because there is a stumbling block in between us. But you can very much convince the Chinese in Australia who are open to our views. They are in Australia. It's a democratic country. You can talk to them. They can talk to you. So one of the best things you can do is you can explain to them what the Tibetans, how the Tibetan exile community is, and how the middle way will not only benefit Tibetan, but also how it will benefit the whole of China. Because we are talking about 100 million Chinese. Currently, what we are seeing is 93 million Chinese Communist Party members, which means that the bulk of majority, like 1,100 million are not member of Communist Party. So we have a lot of faith in them, even though we don't have any faith in the 90 million Chinese communist leaders. So that's how we can reach to them. Because you look at the Chinese government, most of them are not workers now that they claim to be like 70, 80 years ago. Most of the Chinese communist leaders, they come from high echelon, higher layers of their society. You can't find much of the workers at the top level now. So you have to convince those people who are educated, those who are born in the post-1980s or 1990s, like you and I, so that we can come to a point where they will have to confess that, yes, the Tibetans are doing for the benefit of China as well, not just for the Tibetans themselves. That's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kunzela. So, Terinla, do you have any concluding words or anything else you'd like to say today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, this has been like a really fascinating discussion. I've taken lots of notes just for my own self-reflection after this discussion. But I think one of the things that I've taken away from our discussion has been really how His Holiness has managed to emphasize the uniqueness and the I guess the preciousness of Tibetan culture and Tibetan identity, while also drawing attention to the kind of the universal nature of, kind of like the universal aspects of Tibetanness too. And so how, and like what we've all been saying, and across just the fact that we can talk about issues ranging from human rights to the environment, to education, to politics, to democracy, through the lens of His Holiness's teachings and example, and through Tibetan culture and Tibetan history, just shows how much, the Tibetan perspective, Tibetan experience can offer internationally. So, and I take a lot of personal, like you mentioned, Hadala, like with pride, like kind of sense of personal pride and confidence, knowing that I have these kind of, inner resources and just the resources of my people, my country, my history, when I approach, big issues like the climate crisis or, human rights abuses or, education, and those kind of, or democracy. And so I know that I can draw on those kind of inner values and the strength of my community and my ancestry as well. So I think that's like a big thing. And another thing I found was really interesting was that, who we are as Tibetans can evolve. I think that's really important. And, while also, of course, always maintaining our, that kind of the essence of what makes us Tibetan. And sometimes I find it hard to describe exactly what it is, but then if I look at His Holiness and his example, I can kind of see that essence while also seeing, how universal it can still be. So like, there's always a danger of, being proud in oneself and one's people, of becoming, insular or a bit narrow focus or inward looking. But I think His Holiness always reminds us to continuously look outwards and draw inspiration and learnings and strengths and things from, other communities, other cultures, other faiths, other traditions. And so I think that's great. And I guess in terms of a movement for Tibet, always kind of remembering, the strength that we have in the diversity of our diaspora, but also, of course, maintaining unity. So that kind of unity and diversity kind of idea is important, and just remaining flexible and agile. So I think, as Tawangla mentioned, like even, being sensitive to, the current relevant issues and political issues facing the world, and also the local communities and the local context that you find yourselves.
Hello, Terinla. I think we might have lost Terinla. He's doing a beautiful job of summing up the discussions. But in the meanwhile, I might turn to Pamela. If you have any sort of any concluding remarks that you'd like to make, or anything else you'd like to add.
Just about the need for unity in our community, and drawing back to the education perspective, because growing up in a Tibetan school, like we had like so many friends. We grew up together, but then I don't know what it is, because I think probably it's the education system or how we were like taught all these Tibetan values that it really never occurred to us like what your next friend or your, next door friend, which province he or she belonged to. Like it really never was a thing. Like to be honest, I still don't know like some of my really closest like friends which province they belong to, because it's really nothing and not something that we would ask like which I don't know, are you Amdo or like are you Utang? It's never really something. And I also really wonder why is that so, like, because I think it's really to do with the education system or the environment that we grew up in back in the Tibetan schools. So I really hope this is how it will continue to be like for the Tibetans even after we leave school, so that we can bring this in the community, the Tibetan community that's outside of the school environment, because from what I've noticed, like most of these kind of unnecessary, really divisive like unnecessary things, these are usually like not in the school environment, it's out of the school. So I would really hope that those Tibetans who've been to these Tibetan schools and they have this good thing about them, that they don't really like have this this sense of this unnecessary sense of your province like affecting the unity of our Tibetan community outside when we leave school, because I think this is the unity is something that's really important and need of the time, and it's not really a time to be kind of like not being unified. It's really a time to unite and be one. It doesn't matter like where you're from. It's just I think it's that that feeling that I learned, or I don't know, maybe just acquired naturally from school time. I just really hope that's something that the school once they leave school, they can take it to the wider Tibetan community and like influence them rather than them influencing us and making us, like them. So that's something I really wanted to say.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your hopes, Pamela. I think there's a lot holding us together as a people, and I think we touched on a lot of these during the discussion that we've had here. So I think there's every chance that we'll just keep advancing. As a united community. I think there's always going to be, in every community, there's always kind of, some forces that try to create divisions and so on. But I think on the whole, we're a very cohesive and united community. And sometimes I feel like in that some of the divisions are overemphasized. So I'm very hopeful, and I definitely share your hope, but I am very hopeful about the situation. Sarah, I saw that you dropped out earlier. Were there any? I don't think we've got a lot of time now, but are there any sort of? Do you want to tie up any loose ends?
No, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to apologize for dropping out, but I think I mentioned everything that I had to. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. And Tongla, can I turn to you for any final remarks?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll be brief. I'll be super brief. And again, it's just me expressing admiration for another panel member. I actually, Bemala said just then, expressed sort of two contradictory ideas, which I think are, if you were to kind of embody both, they're quite difficult. And so the first one was this idea of being unified, right? And the second one was, she mentioned I think when she spoke quite a long time ago, she was mentioning the idea about not being too prescriptive about what it means to be a Tibetan. So the idea of being unified as a people but not being prescriptive about what you are is it's kind of sometimes it might seem contradictory because you might think that to be unified you need to be unified around some certain ideals or ideas or notions or parameters. But I actually like the fact that she said those two contradictory ideas because they fit with the very person that His Holiness is. His Holiness is this open-minded, engaged person, as you were talking about his engagement with scientists. He is so comfortable and confident with his identity being challenged and being, having contradictory information that he doesn't see it as a threat to himself. He sees it as something which enriches himself. And I think we as Tibetans have to, going back to what Tenzin Bultodorong was saying, like about the quality and the quantitative qualities about our democracy. As individuals, if we can look at His Holiness's example about how he engages with all the complexity and difficulties of your identity and who you might be and the ideas you might hold, and you have some sort of civic notion as a Tibetan that you have to cherish this democracy that we have been bestowed by His Holiness, then we have to be comfortable with contradiction. We have to be comfortable with no hard and fast parameters of who we are. Yes, the language is important. I struggle with the language, like you know my personal struggles with the language. But, the notion being that I appreciate the importance of the Tibetan language and I'll continue it. And there'll be lots of people listening who will struggle with it and still, believe themselves to be as Tibetan as the next person. And we have to embrace, whatever differences we have, whether it's regionalism, comfort with the language, even religion, even concepts of what it means to be religious, because that is the unimpeachable model that His Holiness has set for us. And that is something we should wake up every day grateful to have been alive to witness.
Well, thank you all very much. We've gone half an hour over time, and I think it reflects how much we have to discuss. And, I think we could have gone on for quite a bit longer still. So anyway, thank you very much to all the panelists. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I hope the audience has gotten something out of this. I don't need to do any sort of additional concluding remarks because I think you guys have done a fantastic job of covering what we discussed earlier in the session. So I just once again like to thank the Tibetan Information this event and to the representative Kumail Habula for this wonderful opportunity to be a part of these celebrations. I'd also like to thank the team at Tibettv and Namgyal Tsolna and Lobsangla in particular for their technical support to make this happen. And lastly, but certainly not least, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience who's joined us today. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found the discussion engaging. I hope there's some things in there that you can draw inspiration from, and from the example of His Holiness and his life and all that he's done for Tibetans and the broader world, and that you can draw on that inspiration and try to manifest that gratitude in some form of action in your life, whether it benefits you personally or your society or the world at large, maybe on issues like climate change. Certainly I'll be that's what I'll be doing, and I hope you will be too. So given that this is a celebration of gratitude towards His Holiness, I'd like to end the event with a wish for the long life of His Holiness, because he does mean so much for us and for the world, and fulfillment of his wishes. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.